So I'm joined on stage by three amazing women who are doing, your phone or something, go get it, who are just doing incredible things. So I want them to why don't we start out by telling kind of what you guys are, introduce yourselves, and then, like, what are you working on, and what brought you to there? So we'll go, Jalak.
Okay. Hi, it's great to be here. Always a fan of what Shah Rose puts together. And thanks for coming out. So I'm a VC. I'm actually launching my own fund, Future Perfect Ventures in New York City. I've been a VC for 15 years. And worked a lot at the intersection of impact investing and I guess more traditional venture. And I really hope to marry the two with this fund.
Hi, I'm Beverly Parenti. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my story. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been working in Silicon Valley for many years, launching companies in various verticals, and one of my later companies was a technology accelerator where my husband and I, who I also met at a startup, were mentoring entrepreneurs and helping them to expand their businesses. And one day, he was invited to speak to a group of men at San Quentin prison to teach them about business and entrepreneurship. And he came home that night and he was just so energized and so focused and had this great idea. Why don't we start Kick Labs inside San Quentin? I thought, that's weird. Why would I want to spend my free time inside prison? And he was really taken aback and thought, maybe you should do some research about what's happening there and give it a chance. So I did some research about issues that are facing the prison system today, especially in California, and found out that the amount of money we're spending to keep men incarcerated there is about $50,000 a year. The average inmate is in for about 20 years. So do the math, it's $1 million. And recidivism runs at about 60%. So if they don't have the skills to succeed in society when they're released, then 60% are going to come back. I've already invested $1 million as an investor as well. That was really a bad investment. So how could I help change that? If I could change just by a few percentage points the rate of recidivism, I could make a difference for taxpayers in California and for society in general. So I went to meet some of the men who later became the founders of the program, and I was just blown away by their intelligence, their interest, and their desire to change their lives, to help their families and their communities. And when you realize that they're not bad people, they're people who made bad decisions one time in their life, sometimes more, I just said, yes, I can do this. And 3 years ago, we launched Last Mile, and I already graduated 3 classes and have several returned citizens who are doing wonderful things. And hopefully I will have a chance to tell you a little bit about the curriculum and how we create entrepreneurs in the most unlikely places.
Shiko.
Hi, I'm Shiko. Yes, I flew in from Nairobi, Kenya yesterday. I'm still very jet lagged. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know where to start. Let me start way back. How many of you have seen these ads about African kids surviving past the age of 5? It has to be about water or health or medical thing. I mean, by a show of hand.
Probably everybody's seen those ads.
You've seen those ads and CNN stories. So I was one of those kids. And having no chance of surviving, and my birthday is in 2 weeks' time, gives me a privilege to be able to change the world. And I've wanted to change the world since I was a kid. But on the other side, I love maths. I was a geek since I was a kid. My mom says I used to love maths since I was like in 1st grade. And when I went to university, I chose computer science because, well, it has a lot of maths and I'm good at maths. Then I love programming, I love coding. But at the end of my undergraduate, I had this crisis thing. I was volunteering for UNICEF. I was encountering poverty. And I was wondering, how is computer science ever going to solve poverty in my lifetime? And it was a big crisis for me. And I purposed to be able to change the world using technology. I found a great graduate school program at the University of Cape Town, where they marry social impact and technology. They build technology specifically to improve people's lives. And for me, that was a turning point. I started looking at how do you change people's lives using technology? What is the biggest thing that I can do to change people's lives? At first, for me, it was, let's change democracy, then I'm Kenyan. And 2007, 2008 violence happened, and I was distraught. And I said, okay, let's forget about government and policymakers. What else can a normal human citizen be able to use to change lives? And I was based in Khayelitsha in Cape Town, in South Africa, and I started working with this group of people who had great mobile phones, but did not know the power of the internet that they were holding. They could text, they could call, but they didn't know what they were holding. And it's a long story, but the research I talked to a lot of NGOs, and the one problem that stood out was you have to solve unemployment. To solve all these other problems, health issues, violence, all these other things can be solved if somebody has an income, if they find themselves valuable. And I know a lot of people think that a job should not define you, but to many people, even in this room, whatever job you're doing actually does define you. You find yourself more valuable if you're actually waking up in the morning with a purpose to do something. And that's what I started doing. First of all, was to cut down the cost of finding employment. It will cost about $5 a day to try and find employment. I cut that down to less than 2 cents, way less than 2 cents USD. And that's where Umeli was founded. It grew organically. At some point during my PhD, it was supposed to be a user base of 100, so I could test changes by changing behavior by using technology. At some point, I was looking at my logs, oh my God, I have 2,000 people. How am I supposed to ever write a dissertation out of this? And then also, don't forget about that. You say, it grew organically. That's part of your story. And right now, it has more than 500,000 users in South Africa. And it's changing lives. 20% of these people are actually getting jobs and income levels increasing by 300%. We've just partnered with a great nonprofit organization that has grassroots in Kenya that in the next year will be affecting 1 million lives. That's 1 million people whose lives have been changed by connecting them to opportunities. And I mean, that's what motivates me when you see somebody's life has been transformed because they've been connected to an opportunity where technology is a mediator. And that's the name of the product. It's called Umeli, which means mediator in Nguni language.
And can you say a little bit, the reason you were saying earlier, the $5 is really, it's kind of printing your resume, getting people to help you. It's really sort of basic things that you're kind of disintermediating and taking the price down on. Is that right? And
yeah. So the $5, which is about 50 rand, is not for anything fancy. It's because you can't type and because you don't have a computer at home and a printer and a fax machine, you have to go to a cyber cafe. And this person has to sit down and you have to dictate to them your qualification, and they'll type it down for you on a computer, print out for you one copy, which you have to photocopy to be able to fax. For those 3 activities, you pay the $5, and you have not walked around to drop it to your CV. You've not taken a cab or a taxi or a matatu to town to actually go and drop the CV. That is only getting a piece of paper in your hand that has your qualification. And that's something technology can solve pretty easy. For me, that was like a night worth of coding. It was like basically we sat down with a number of NGOs and structured 12 questions that ask you, what's your first name, what's your second name, where did you go to school, what's the highest grade that you got, where did you work last, where did you work before that, who can vouch for your qualification. Those 12 questions, by just answering that, we'll take that data, crunch it, put it out somewhere on the server, and send to you a link that you can send to an employer by email. Or you can fax it by just clicking on a button on your phone. And yes, fax machines still work somewhere in the world, believe me.
cool. So Beverly, can you say a little bit more, diving into these programs and stuff, a little bit more about what you're doing and the experiences you guys are having?
Certainly. So the name of the program, I don't know if I mentioned it prior, is The Last Mile. And what we do is we teach the men about the digital world because most of them have never been on the internet, used a smartphone or seen a mobile app. And yet, through the books they read and the guest speakers who come in and the mentors they have and the entrepreneurs who come in and talk about how they've created their businesses, they're able to create a business plan using the business model canvas actually taught at the University of Michigan, and come up with an idea that's something of their passion, something they could envision themselves doing when they're free. And they write up a plan that includes a technology component and a social cause, and then present it to an actual demo day inside the prison to invited guests and guest speakers, as well as fellow inmates. In fact, at the very first demo day we had at San Quentin, the First Lady of California, Anne Brown, attended, as well as the Secretary of CDCR, Matthew Cate, at the time. And many of the people who were in the audience from the business community said that if these men were free, some of these businesses are actually fundable. And the other component of the class that's really very important is how they participate in social media. So we teach them how to create a personal brand and how to have a voice rather than just being a voice of an incarcerated person. And they don't have internet access, as I said, so they actually have to write or type their information, their tweets. They have tweet sheets, and they fill them in with 140 characters, minus their hashtags or their whatever, the @TLM, which is our Twitter feed. And we then give them to volunteers, and the content is uploaded online by our volunteers. And in fact, something that is incredible, I don't know if everyone here knows Quora, which is an acronym for question or answer, and it's a fabulous site online where people can ask or answer questions, and the community is incredible. So our last mile participants answer questions on Quora, and in fact, I believe we're now like the #3 most popular feed on Quora. One of our graduates from the first class, Kenyatta Leal, who today is a free man working for a technology company, won the Quora Answer of the Year for 2012. And we actually, I went into San Quentin to film his acceptance speech and played it in New York at Times Center. And it was just tremendous honor. So social media plays an important role. Having a voice and creating a personal brand, no matter what you do or who you are in today's technology world and business world, is so important. And we teach them how to do that inside as well.
That's great. Jalek, can you say a little more? What's interesting, we had this whole discussion backstage about for-profit, non-profit, what's a social venture, and we all kind of agreed that it's kind of blurring in some ways that are interesting. You know, we're saying like a for-profit company that is making jobs is having huge impact anywhere in the world, you know, and sort of social ventures in that. And you move back and forth between the two. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about wearing these different hats and some of the things you've worked on in some of them, and some of your thoughts about that general piece.
Sure.
Because you were at Omidyar.
Yeah, I was running mobile investments in emerging markets for Omidyar for a while, and so invested in Mexico, India, Nairobi, and I was actually born in Nairobi, so I grew up going back,
to
Kenyans here.
Kenyans in the house.
And also I started investing in '99 for Intel Capital, and actually invested in Brazil and India back then too. And what I find exciting right now is the amount of connectivity we now have, you know, through the mobile phones, and how, I mean, these are examples of people, you know, reaching people who didn't have a voice or didn't have connectivity or didn't have efficient ways to communicate or get jobs, are now able to through these technology platforms. And I actually think a lot of these solutions are going to come from the grassroots level, right? It's going to be entrepreneurs on the ground solving a pain point on the ground. And I mean, they can collaborate with folks out in Silicon Valley or New York, but I think the key is that collaboration to happen. So right now, I think there is a blurring of lines. I think there's more of a blurring of lines in the entrepreneurial world than there is in the investment world. I think, you know, calling something an impact fund automatically has connotations giving up on some of the returns. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think there's a spectrum. You definitely have, like at Omidyar, they have a big initiative around property rights, and that is really hard. It's a long-term issue. It's hard to have for-profit solutions in that sector. But then you move all the way up to mobile apps and where you can at scale, in some of these emerging markets, have very profitable and sustainable businesses. I think we're going to continue to see that blurring over the next 5 to 10 years.
One of the things I once, about Intel Capital, I once spoke with some people there. This was a lot of years ago. But it was interesting because it was so international in the investing. And they were really focused on particular unique skills, like your towering strength, that you might find in a particular country. And so they would say, for example, this was in the 90s, but Brazil was having issues with financial issues, so it was one of the best places to have real-time financial software talent who could transact very fast because they needed to. There was amazing talent in security and mobile and stuff out of London, or Russia had this. And so, to your point, there's unique talent around the world, and the people who know best are the people in those markets. And as the entrepreneurial interconnects, the network happens. We're starting to see that, which is really great. One of the things, and start to get questions ready, because I want to get you guys to ask some questions. I want to open it up. But I'll ask one more before you go, and then I have a bunch more here if you don't. What are the organizations that are helping you the most in this work? A lot of people want to do this kind of work. It's interesting to know, what are the organizations, what are some of the places that you thought might have been a good path, and maybe that was helpful in some ways, but actually there were some that were much more helpful. So maybe, are they funders, are they angels, are they nonprofits, is it government things, is it a first customer, entrepreneur organizations, peer networks, what is it? So I don't know.
So I'll say that what really caught me by surprise is the massive amount of interest for people to volunteer to be part of our program. We just launched in Los Angeles last week. It's our first satellite program after San Quentin. And we have already started the program, and in our second week of operation, our program is 6 months, and it's twice a week for 6 months. In the second week, it was all volunteer-led. So it proved the model that we can expand in the future. That was one area that is really noteworthy. And the second is the media. Without any outreach, we've had just incredible media. In fact, CNN should be covering us the story of the last mile next week, and they've interviewed a lot of our returned citizens who are currently in jobs. So media and volunteers, and then corporations who are interested in actually funding the last mile, and individuals. It's what we count on. And
quickly, before we go, can you say the percentages? You were talking about the percentage of people in prison in the world and where they are, and that was striking to me.
So I believe the correct numbers today, although it does change, is that the United States is 9% of the world population, and yet we have 25% of the incarcerated population in the world in the United States.
It's amazing. Chico, can you talk a little bit? Who's helping you most, and any surprises, any key things, insights there?
Okay. One of my mentors, Kentaro, says that technology is an enabler. It's a catalyst. And that is so true, especially in my world, where as a technologist, I love computing. I could build an app for everything. I realized that the best way to actually have impact is to work with people who understand the problem. And in my case, I realized the government, I know we disagree on that, and non-profit organizations who are already on the ground. There are people who've been working on the unemployment problem and youth problem for 25, 30, 50 years. Those are people who will give you insights that no amount of research can ever give you. And they have the nitty-gritty information of what can, as any solution, technology or otherwise, work. The government, they're the key stakeholder. If you reduce unemployment in a country by 5%, the government will take all the glory. Let them push for you the actual solution. Tell them, here, use it. I'm going to stand in the background, I'm just the machine running it. Just use it. What else can we do for you as a government? My biggest surprise was, I think I mentioned, was being from Africa. Africa is a very risky place to invest. I know that. I live there. So it is very hard to actually come by funding of any sort. So we've pretty much, the Kenyan version of this, pretty much bootstrapped. Totally. Because people are, okay, we are trying to, great cause, great partnership, we have done all our homework, but who will be using technology? Are there mobile phones in Africa? You get questions like those, you're thinking, we're 95% mobile phone penetration. We have like a 70+% youth population. These are guys who are using Facebook, Twitter, Google. They're downloading apps of all sorts. These are people who will be using the technologies that we are pitching here today in the next 3 to 5 years maximum. I just read a statistic that 40% of phones being sold this year in Africa are smartphones. So all of you preaching should start seeing what it would be like to have your app being used in a market that is not the US. So for me, it is being able to open up those people and getting the trust of somebody saying, I'm going to believe in what you're doing, because it's not only impacting you as an entrepreneur, but it's going to be impacting a lot more lives. That has been my biggest surprise. I thought, oh, it's a great cause, we are going to help you, but no, Africa is a bit too far away for me to actually be able to believe in this. Yeah.
So you are more investing, so you're more helping, but who comes with you? Well, are there particular people who show up?
Well, what I've been surprised over the last few years has been the public-private partnerships that have been emerging, and I think it's happening on a worldwide basis. It's definitely happening here in the U.S. I was with the New York City Investment Fund for a while in New York, and really saw firsthand how, I think both the public and private sectors need to know their their strengths, right, and also where they should let the other take over. And but there's, if you look at the Cornell campus that's being built, it's a technology campus being built in New York, but it really could happen because the city of New York donated the land, which is, several $100 million. And then they had a competitive bid process for who could run the school. But so I'm seeing more and more of that happen because, look, we're living in a world where there's a lot of competition. The developed markets are not growing or ever going to grow the way they did. We have, the developing world, which is very young, and I think there's so much pent-up demand and a lot of potential. And so, I'd like to see more bridges between the two. I think these public-private partnerships are happening in each region and country, but it'd be great to see them starting to interact with each other.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also thought when we were talking about getting entrepreneurs mentoring each other across regions would be really helpful, especially for people who have a smaller network where they are in emerging markets. I'm going to quick check and see if we have any questions out here. Anybody? There's one. Somebody, do we want to bring mics? And there's one here too. Yeah. How do we have a mics for them?
Yeah,
They're getting mics. Okay.
So while
there's
you're
one
getting
there,
to the
one here.
mics,
So, yeah.
while you're getting to the mics, something that I do want to share is that we are in talks with a Midwest state and also in California to open our program, The Last Mile, in women's facilities.
So we're back.
Yeah.
We started with men because San Quentin is strictly men. We had to prove the model and get the confidence of the organizations. And so I'm really going to work hard to make sure we can do this for women as well in very near future. So volunteers,
You're here.
welcome.
I'm volunteering. Okay. Do you have a mic? Yes, no? Okay, and then we'll go here. Okay, go.
Oh, well, she.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go. Whoever just spoke, I didn't hear. But go ahead.
Well, she kind of answered my question, but my question is, well, I'm a fan of Orange is the New Black, and I see how difficult it is to implement these type of programs in these facilities. So I was wondering, how did you get these facilities to cooperate?
Well, that's a tough question. It was a tough battle, but what we did was we were very diligent in our follow-through. We decided very quickly that we needed to go to Sacramento in California and get Sacramento on board with what we were doing. When Ann Brown came to see our demo day, she became a big fan. So we had to prove that it would work first, gain their confidence, and really move slowly. You know, the idea of social media was just mind-boggling. And in fact, we're dealing with administrations who may not even be on Twitter or know what Twitter, well, they must know what Twitter is by now in San Francisco, but you know, it takes time. So if you have a passion and you want to persevere, it's just a matter of doing the work and keep going.
Yeah, good question. Yes.
So given that most internet companies today are disruptive in some form, and that part of the criteria under which companies are judged is how many people they can have an impact on, in addition to how much money they'll make, but do you think that the term social enterprise really has any relevance anymore in this field? And if so, how would you define it?
It's a great question. I led a transition of Google.org to add more engineering, and it was interesting because sometimes the reporters would say, well, aren't you just getting more users for Google? And, you know, we would launch, you know, right after the Haiti earthquake, we put satellite imagery up immediately so all the first responders were there. We had some data center engineers run around and get tons of stuff in our data center and basically put together 7 pallets of network stuff, you know, routers and that, and get it to the ISPs that we knew there so the network could come back and stuff. And so that was the kind of heroic, you know, engineering we wanted to give. But the question, as you put, you know, it's like, isn't that sort of just what, the routers are less, but definitely users of Earth, even if it's in crisis. And so we were talking a lot together about how the lines are blurring, you know, especially with free products. So what do you guys think about that, and how, in some ways you're asking a little bit about measuring impact and also this blurring between. So any thoughts?
I actually still think that there kind of is a distinct social enterprise. I'd like to see a day when, you know, all companies care about the environment and care about long-term sustainability and doing what's right by, you know, their employees, et cetera. I still do think I think we're making progress towards that. I don't think we're quite there yet. There's still, I mean, you look at, you know, companies with corporate social responsibility programs, and there's so many, you know, there's a lot of hypocrisy and inconsistencies, and even with smaller companies. I mean, it's just kind of the world we live in. So, what I do think is very encouraging is so many internet tech entrepreneurs I talk to want an investor who cares about these things. Now, the company may not, you know, be focused on any of these areas, but they're very dedicated to building a company with these values. And I see so much more of that now than I did even 3 or 4 years ago. So I think you know, it's the entrepreneurs saying, I will only take money from investors who are aligned and who are going to help me build a company with these values. And I think that's encouraging.
I definitely think there's a higher level of consciousness in, you know, many of the larger corporations, and certainly in the eyes of the entrepreneurs. Just yesterday, actually, we were able to pitch our program, The Last Mile, for a potential grant from LinkedIn. And LinkedIn actually is running a program to donate money to a number of social causes. And to me, that's just outstanding. And I'm hoping to see other large corporations follow in their footsteps.
I mean, for me, it's what Tony said this morning. It's less of return on investment, but return on community. It's the values that drive that. Do you want to see more profits or more people's lives change? And that for me, when you check that bottom line, that determines on whether you're a social enterprise or a fully enterprise company. What's your end game? Is it the return on your money and more profits in your account, or is it the community? There's something else he said, part of it.
I mean, I think that's, I obviously believe in all of that, but if you look at just stock market value, I mean, the reality is it's still, profits based. And so I think, we now, the B Corp, and we're moving towards taking into account a lot of, other factors, but as public companies, it can be really challenging to have some of these other.
Right. And having good models emerging around social ventures that are helping them take the best of the corporate practices without some of the things that steer them away from doing the most impact for the community versus the bottom line. Yeah. Other questions out there? There's one.
Hi.
Hello.
This is the last question, by the way. Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, great. Hi, I'm Eleanor, and I work on the diversity markets team at Google. And what our team tries to do is focus on emerging markets and underrepresented groups and businesses in the US right now, and trying to bridge that digital divide. So I'm curious to hear from you, and as well as Megan, how you feel that your work and your businesses can relate to emerging markets in the US. How would you define emerging markets in the US? Who do you think those people are? What's the opportunity there? And what do you think your businesses, or just businesses here in general that are attending today, can do to address our domestic emerging markets? Thank you.
That's a big question.
It's a great
There's
question.
like 10 questions.
I think all three of you are doing things related to that. So in health, and I don't know if you.
Well, you can look at underrepresented groups here in the U.S., and you can define that geographically, as well as, there's a lot of discussion around women, and not enough women participating in entrepreneurship, or at least scaling. I think women participate in entrepreneurship more than men do, but they don't scale as often. So I actually, see huge opportunity as an investor in these markets, because they're often neglected by my fellow investors. I have a very different background and look very different and interact very differently than a lot of my colleagues do. And so I'm able to find these pockets of opportunity, and that's what investing is about, is kind of getting that unfair advantage and access. And if you kind of keep your eyes open to some of that, a lot of the entrepreneurs I'm talking to right now are not kind of in the mainstream, even though they're very talented.
One thing made me think about is one time the guy who was running Google India made a presentation, and he actually put on one side the map of India, and the other side he put 3 different geographic regions, and he put, I think it was the UK, and he said, India is all 3 of these. He put the UK, he put Brazil, and he put parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And he said, when you think of, for example, if you say you think of the US, in this case you think of India, he said you think you know what the market is, but actually the stereotype that you think of for the UK, the market here is just as big as that stereotype of that population, right? He said the stereotype of Brazil, which still has the same striations from up and down as any country, just like all 3, is the same population number as, would be that stereotype of Brazil, are in India, of the middle income people. And then the lower income people who are struggling, the number of people who live in sub-Saharan Africa in these particular countries actually equals the number of people in that group. So India actually is all 3 of these 3 stereotypes. And so to your point, the US is those too. And it's very interesting to think about all the different markets there. And I do think that there are distinct advantages of really paying attention and being a diverse team, both in whether it's in your company, your social enterprise, or your investing firm, so that you see the things other people don't see, and you can have much more impact on the world and on your country. Any thoughts from either of you guys on this one?
Just that I feel like we're serving an underserved group of people who really can have a big impact on society, because it's not just helping an individual, but it's helping an individual, a family, and a community, and also raising the aspirations of men and women who are still incarcerated to see that there is hope for the future. And I think if you give people hope, they can better themselves and they can better society in general.
Shiko, on your product, it reminds me a little bit, the Google Earth Veterans, VetNet, made a really great form in the same kind of way for returning veterans to help them translate. In this case, the need that they had was to translate their military service to communicate the kind of things the corporate world would need to read from that. And so it was a great tool that helped, that they were struggling with that, and it helped them do that. So it's the same kind of idea that would tap into a group that needed it.
My parting shot is something I've learned. I've known Megan since I was in graduate school. Is follow your passion. And I always say this, and this is the right audience because you're all innovators and founders. Don't feel like because you've listened to her and me and the others that you have to go and solve world hunger or some other cause. Solve what is tugging at your heart. I love the lady who did Applied. The fashion lady, because it spoke to me. I'm thinking, she can actually help me find a pair of jeans that can fit my hips, you know. And that is something that she's passionate about. Follow your passion. My passion for me, because of my own surrounding, is I want to enable people get out of poverty, to economically empower them. But you should not feel guilty because you're privileged from a privileged background in the US. Find something that is locally relevant to you, that you're passionate about, and follow it, and you're going to change the world. Changing the world is not about world hunger and poverty. It's about solving a problem that most tugs at your heart.
And we're at time, so whoever will have the last word.
I think that was a great last word. I don't know if any people, but Jalek, Beverly, Shiko, thank you very much, and thanks all of you. Yeah.